On Sunday, the 2nd of November this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its synthesis report, the most comprehensive assessment of climate change ever taken. The report integrates the latest knowledge on climate change, its potential impacts and ways to adapt and reduce vulnerabilities, as well as strategies to mitigate climate change. About a month earlier, the World Wildlife Fund's biennial report on the state of the global environment paints a pretty gloomy picture of a planet in decline. The WWF says humanity's growing demands on nature are already unsustainable. This means we are eating into our natural capital. Well, these two reports are focused today on Earth File. Welcome to the program. I am Ayola Kasim.
Findings reveal that wildlife populations worldwide have declined by 52% since 1970. We are living as though we had more than one planet at our disposal. By taking more than nature can replenish, we are jeopardizing our own future.
The absence of birds in the sky and other wildlife in our forest to actually, in the oceans, to actually send us very clear signals that we are not living sustainably.
Researchers at the World Wildlife and the Zoological Society of London also found that the number of wild animals on Earth has halved in the past 40 years. Creatures across land, rivers and the seas are being decimated as humans kill them for food in unsustainable numbers while polluting or destroying their habitats. The steep decline of animal, fish and bird numbers was calculated by analyzing 10,000 different populations covering 3,000 species in total. This data was then, for the first time, used to create a representative living planet index, reflecting the state of all 45,000 known vertebrates. A second index in the new Living Planet report calculates humanity's ecological footprint, that is, the scale at which it is using up natural resources. Currently, the global population is cutting down trees faster than they regrow, catching fish faster than the oceans can restock, pumping water from rivers and aquifers faster than rainfall can replenish them, and emitting more climate-warming carbon dioxide than oceans and forests can absorb.
More broadly, that our footprint on the planet is increasing, continues to rise. That means that we are cutting trees faster than they can regrow, we are catching fish faster than they can reproduce, we are emitting more CO2 than oceans and forests can absorb. So we are on a total unsustainable path. We know that very clearly now. We are overshooting, we are living beyond the planetary boundaries, and we have to change the trend. And I would like to mention another dimension of poverty. Poverty is, in some regions, is considered a driver of environmental degradation, but much more often is actually a consequence of environmental degradation. And it's actually very true that there is no future, there is no map for true poverty alleviation if you do not really address environmental issues. So many people are depending directly on natural resources, and most of the time those communities are actually the poorest in the world, and so the security of their livelihood is very strongly connected to a healthy environment. And more broadly, there is not going to be a prosperous future for humanity in a degraded environment. I think a healthy, diverse, productive and natural environment is key to any truly and sustainable development path.
They made it very, very clear that all the data is in now. There's irrefutable evidence that we are producing far more carbon into the atmosphere than the Earth is able to recycle. You know, there's natural recycle systems that go on in planet Earth. You know, the recycling that goes through the trees in terms of carbon, you know, all the green takes up, the oceans take it all up. But we're producing so much that it's gone beyond the capacity of planet Earth to recycle it. And that's, of course, the major driving factor of the global warming that is causing climate change, that is pushing us to catastrophic climatic conditions, several of which we've experienced over the last 2 years.
The report concludes that today's average global rate of consumption would need 1.5 planet Earths to sustain it. But 4 planets will be required to sustain US levels of consumption, or 2.5 Earths to match UK consumption levels. The fastest decline among the animal populations were found in freshwater ecosystems, where numbers have plummeted by 75% since 1970. The biggest declines in animal numbers have been seen in low-level developing nations, while conservation efforts in rich nations have seen small improvements overall. But the big declines in wildlife in rich nations had already occurred long before the new report's baseline year of 1970. The last wolf in the United Kingdom was shot in 1680. Also, by importing food and other goods produced via habitat destruction in developing nations, rich nations are outsourcing wildlife decline to those countries. For example, a third of all the products of deforestation, such as timber, beef, and soya, were exported to the European Union between 1990 and 2008.
What the world is the result of what the world is doing. The only result is only telling us of the need to have a rethink, much more properly and much more action-packed, and not thinking that, well, it's one of those problems that will come and go. Because every time we think like that, we are impacting more on the earth, and we are not planning how we as human beings contribute to sustainability of existence of people in good environment. And the report only speaks about the ecological footprints, the inner impacts in different areas on species, and in a kind of summary stated that if we go by the way we are going, of at least impacting using about 80 global per hectares of land, 18 million global per hectares of land, 18 billion global per hectares of land, and the whole world, global per hectares is just 12 billion. The meaning of it is that we are over, stretching the threshold, and at the end of the day, we have to pay the price. So we need to ask, where are we going to get the extra land to use? That's the first question. The second question is, the second reflection on that report is the consumption pattern of people. And how do we, as human beings of this race, want to change our patterns of resource use and burning of fossil fuels, our need for water, our need for land for agriculture, for food security, our need for land for everything we do, for infrastructure. The third thing that is important is that I think about 2 years ago the world celebrated having the 7 billion population, and the population will continue growing. If it's not, we have to look at that too as an index of, okay, how many of us will continue to be in 2050, and we are still going to be having the same finite land. God has not created more land to add to it, and we've not got the technology to increase the hectarage of land, and we still continue with this consumption pattern. Then in Europe, in America, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, and in other parts of the world, there is need for a global action with local action.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the final draft of the Synthesis report that caps the long road taken to produce its 5th assessment report, which has been released in chunks over the last year. The Synthesis report pulls together the main points from the body of the massive report. The Synthesis report wraps together highlights from the 3 earlier reports on climate science released in September 2013, potential climate impact, and the ways to adapt and reduce vulnerability released in March 2014, and strategies to mitigate climate impacts released in April 2014. It is the product of a sometimes contentious negotiating process over wording and emphasis, and draws on the work of more than 800 scientists. The report is designed to make state-of-the-art thinking about climate change available to policymakers and the public.
I think it's very clear that to avoid the chaos of runaway climate change, we know what we need to dramatically reduce global emissions of greenhouse gases. And I think we need to lead to a future that has much lower intensity in the use of those activities that contribute to emissions of greenhouse gases. It also projects the risks and the expensive and often unquantifiable and destabilizing impacts of a high carbon path of development and growth. While the IPCC does not make any recommendations, policymakers, I am sure, will benefit greatly from seeing the implications of the two alternative development pathways side by side.
The big picture, of course, is one in which Earth's atmosphere and oceans have clearly warmed, with consequences for the hydrologic cycle, the planet's icy regions, and some weather extremes. Statistically speaking, the IPCC report estimates with at least 95% confidence that more than half of this warming is due to human activities. The implications for the future are serious. Continued emission of greenhouse gases will cause further warming and long-lasting changes in all components of the climate system, increasing the likelihood of severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts for people and ecosystems.